Silence. If you wait long enough, any room will fall silent, even without you saying anything. I guess that's one of the things I've learned. So we'll get cracking. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks everybody for coming. Welcome to this event, Centre for Cities and Policy at Manchester event. Obviously our special guest, in case you're not sure, and I don't really need, he doesn't need much of an introduction, but introduction nevertheless, is obviously the Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy. Welcome, Andy Burnham.
Thank you, Andrew.
And the context for the conversation we're going to have over the next 50 minutes or so is the trailblazer deal, but I think it's a chance to roam widely about where we are now, Greater Manchester. How do you feel about the progress that's being made? I've got some things I want to talk to Andy about, get him to say a few things, but bear in mind when we get this sort of second half, there'll be a chance for you to ask a couple of questions of Andy as well, so to get ready with those kinds of questions. I guess a big picture, we'll get into the detail, Andy. Big picture. Where's Greater Manchester now? You know, put the trailblazer conversation and the milestone that it represents in a bit of broader, bigger context for us.
Well, I will. Thanks, firstly, Andrew, for putting this on. I don't wear a suit for anybody these days, but I do for you. That's how seriously I take you. But all of you as well. It's great to see a full room discussing these things on a Thursday afternoon, because I'm getting more and more excited about where the city region's going, but also where devolution is starting to go. And I hope, the fact that you're here suggests that you are as well. I think it's kind of becoming real now. It's happening, I think. Certainly feels to me that Greater Manchester is flying at the moment. You know, you can just look, can't you, at the level of investment that's coming in. You know, the city skyline tells its own story. I was out in the US with the leader of Manchester City Council recently with a joint visit. You know, it's great to be out there with Bev as a new leader. You know, we've just got a really powerful story to tell, and we did tell it, and it got heard over there. It helps when New Order come with you to South by Southwest. You know, that's always a nice card that I can play that others can't. And Man United came with us with their three-handled trophy, which they're very proud of. Sir Alex Ferguson used to put his pens in it on his desk, but they carry it 3,000 miles now. It shows how times have changed. But no, I mean, the city's got a great story to tell. I mean, football, music, those are big strengths of ours, and we don't underplay them, as you know. But just generally, it's got a sense of being a vibrant place to live. Quality of our jobs increases all the time. Did you see Bloomberg recently reported that there are more quality job vacancies or new jobs being advertised here than anywhere else in the UK? So I kind of feel it's really happening, and then when you add the trailblazer into that, that's then about the chapter beyond where we are, because this is exciting now, but that is about obviously where we go in the rest of this decade. And what I can talk to you about today is my thinking about creating the country's first integrated technical education system. That's very much at the forefront of my mind right now. A good landlord charter, and starting to have a much more serious debate about housing standards in all 10 boroughs in social rented and private rented sectors. And of course we'll come back to transport. You know, we are 5 months away now from the start of the B network proper, which is just brilliant. And I think that will further create reasons for people to come and live here, people to come and invest here. So I think the story's in some ways getting really exciting and interesting now. Actually, we've done all the preparatory work, but you know, here we are, and it's a good place to be.
And the trailblazer conversation culminated last month in the sense of announcing the budget, but actually then signed just afterwards. Been part of a long journey, which you've been part of, and obviously others have been as well. So just put it in that context of ongoing conversations that this particular part of the world, Greater Manchester, has been having with government for the best part of a decade in many respects, with various iterations on which. Just to put the trailblazer deal in that context, and then we'll get into a little bit of the detail. Yeah.
So obviously there have been a number of deals, particularly through the Osborne-Cameron period. People will remember that. But a bit of a gap in recent times to the one we've just signed. But the fact that we have been able to sign it, I think, is a recognition that this is here to stay. You know, the government has come back to it, and it was actually a really constructive process. You've heard me say this before, but credit does need to go to Michael Gove for the way that he's working to embed more devolved power in the English regions. And it was, as far as the process goes, it was as good as we've had, if I'm honest, from the government. And the thing that was noticeable to me, so there were, let's say, kind of more less convinced government departments, so I could put it that way. But what it felt like this time was, if there were those sort of people holding out, there was more people around them in the rest of Whitehall saying, no, I think you should, you can't resist anymore, there's no justifiable reason to resist. That was that felt different. We have many more allies in the Whitehall system than I would have expected to have in some ways. I think government departments increasingly can see how we can speed up delivery for them. We can make delivery more likely to succeed for them. That's the thing about being closer to the ground, isn't it? And I think that kind of penny is dropping in Whitehall. People are slowly okay, I can see how this could work for us as well. So it was a really good process. In terms of your question about the line of things, obviously they've been very policy focused up to this point. I think this devolution deal was the most significant of all because of the movement towards that single funding settlement, the single block idea that Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland have had.
So that's the Barnett formula for those that are very geeky in the room, which I'm assuming lots of them are. You've advocated for a Barnett formula type arrangement for England, right? And it's not quite that, but it gets you a little bit closer to that.
Yeah, it's not quite that.
No.
I mean, what you could apply to the single block. So at this point, what we've got is we have funding streams, 150 funding streams roughly, that make up the £1.5 billion that come into the Greater Manchester Combined Authority. And you can kind of work out that it's hard to bid for those funds to get them in the first place, and then you've got separate reporting lines, and the complexity that comes with that is ridiculous. So what this is about is collapsing all of that into one block of funding that we can use much more flexibly. You could then apply a Barnett formula to that funding as we go forward from here to say, well, like Wales and Scotland, the northwest of England, or Greater Manchester in particular, has levels of increased deprivation than other parts of the country. Therefore, we will always apply on any government spending this level of top up. That would be a Barnett, which I would advocate. I think that would start to bring a degree of equity to the way funding works across the UK, which people don't perceive to be there right now. So that, I think, is the single biggest step towards the deepening of devolution that we've yet seen. And we're working towards the next spending review being the part where the first moment where we get that change funding. The other thing I would point to, and again, really keen to come back to it, is the long held ambition of having more control over post-16 technical education, and not just 16 to 19, but lifelong as well. And a big advance has been made there. And for me, sitting in this role as I have done now for 6 years, because it pretty much is almost 6 years to the day, the jigsaw of stuff that I've got, bits of gaps here and there, but there was a whole chunk of the jigsaw missing with the word skills on it. And to have a few big pieces put down there now means that the whole of the jigsaw looks a lot more coherent and complete.
So let's keep going on that, because this is something that you've been a very, very strong advocate and champion of, the desire to try and bring some rationalisation and some activity to the post-16 skills sort of system as it functions or doesn't function in GM. So to say a little bit about what's in the Trailblazer deal in that sort of space, and then what you think that will allow you, or what that will allow you to do as you get more control over more bits of the system.
Yeah, so it's quite broad. So what it's saying is between 16 and 19, it's talking about a board to be created, co-chaired between Greater Manchester and the Department for Education, that will oversee the development of a more integrated system. Post-19, we are, however, being given much more control, full control, and that would be the programmes, a range of programmes, of course, the boot camps people might be familiar with. Already we have adult education, so it would be consolidating all of that funding that's available for lifelong learning, and Department for Work and Pensions funding, which did get advanced to a degree in the Trailblazer, not as much as we would have liked, but still there is a broadening of the devolution we've had through the Department of Work and Pensions. So just explain where my thinking is at, and it'd be great to get some of your responses to it actually, so I'm trialling it out this afternoon. Please don't tweet madly about it, because it's meant to be a bit under wraps until we launch it formally next month. I mean, my kind of sense of this is, we've signed a Trailblazer deal with the government. I would be letting down the cause of devolution in England if we don't now blaze a trail, basically, because that's what it says, isn't it? It's what we've got to do. So I'm really going to put some big, bold ideas out there about totally changing the way we support young people growing up in Greater Manchester. What I mean is, it's not just the powers that we've got things over, it's how you can change people's experience then of the way things are. So I'm looking at a situation where we create as much clarity for young people who are not on the university route as those who are on the university route. And if we can do this, I think we're cracking something that the country's never got right. There are jobs in this city region now that simply did not exist when I came back here from university in the early 90s. I mean, the breadth of the jobs is amazing, the quality of the jobs is amazing. There are plentiful good graduate and non-graduate jobs, not just in the city, but there are many here, but they're also in our boroughs as well. So what we're working towards is a sort of a situation where Greater Manchester, guided by our industry and our Chamber of Commerce, commissions the system, if you like, rather than vice versa, so that we say, these are our strengths in terms of digital and tech and all the variations there, cyber and creative and or in, let's say, life sciences, or in materials or engineering and advanced manufacturing. And this is the number of T-levels and other qualifications we're going to need from you, our colleges. So it's a paradigm shift, basically. You're kind of commissioning what you need from the system. The power of that, of course, is this gives young people a sense that these are real, what we're now taking them towards is a pathway towards a real job. At 14, I'm thinking of something I'm calling the Manchester Baccalaureate. So this would be to balance the English Baccalaureate. The English Baccalaureate is, it says it on the government website, is guided by the needs of universities. The subjects that are in the English Baccalaureate are, in terms on the government's website, the subjects most likely to be favoured by universities when people apply. Well, if you're 14 in Greater Manchester growing up and you're not doing those subjects, what does that say to you? So I'm saying that we should have a Manchester Baccalaureate, which is the alternative qualifications that our employers saying they most value as bringing greater employability. So I'm just speculating now, but I think drama personally brings good employability skills, the communication and the confidence that comes with it, or all of the creative subjects actually, which are out of the English Baccalaureate. But content creation is a massive thing in this city, isn't it? But currently those subjects are not deemed to be right for the English Baccalaureate. Well, I would say why, but anyway, that's a different way. But they should be in a Manchester Baccalaureate, is my point. Engineering's not in the English Baccalaureate. It definitely would be in a Manchester Baccalaureate, if you ask me. And you could add in, I could keep going on, couldn't I? PE, the teamwork, those, I think employers look at things differently. So you can see what I'm coming to. A situation where at 14 we can say to young people, this is what a Manchester Baccalaureate looks like if you're considering your choices. And then they would be aiming at 16 to those kind of clearly laid out domains, which would have T-levels probably at their heart, but other qualifications as well, not just T-levels, where they could then aim, and then they're then on a path to then an apprenticeship at 19 or a degree apprenticeship, and they can see a path to the good jobs that we've got in the city. So I hope I'm explaining it okay and people can get the concept. It's about that line of sight from when you're 14. Okay, this way, this way, this way, A-levels, UCAS, university, right, well that's clear, isn't it? It's about doing the same on the other side. Oh right, Manchester Baccalaureate, T-level, apprenticeship, degree apprenticeship, job. And that's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, it always strikes me when I listen to you talk about this, in the sense, or maybe others in the room have a different reaction, but my reaction is always, that seems very, very common sense led approach, which is, I think, is a good thing, and yet it tells you something about the system as it currently is, which that is in some respects heresy in certain parts of the, of the system, the skills system, the education system. The point you're making, that would require quite a significant change in mindset and way of operation. So it's an interesting. It feels common sense on the one hand and obvious, but also it will present a challenge to the system, which I think is a good thing. But it's an interesting point about where we are, I think, and how lost we are in that non-university system where we don't have a set of principles and a real functioning system.
I think we've got to start with where young people are, aren't we? I mean, how do they know? How can they work out what to do and what to take at 14? They're not given clarity, are they, on that? So who can argue? Who can actually argue against that? I mean, I don't see how you can personally. So it's not about necessarily provoking the system, it's just saying, look, in Whitehall, you don't start from the mindset of the average 14-year-old in Greater Manchester. You have to come at it from but we can from where we are. This is what we can add. So I would say to the Department for Education and the government, we're going to add value to you and what you want to do, because your T-levels also require an industry placement as part of them. Well, we're going to be much better finding those than you are. And in fact, if your reform doesn't get built bottom up, it probably is going to be the latest technical education reform to fail. So the way I kind of pitched for the Trailblazer, Andrew, was to say, we'll make these things work for you. So the things that the government wants, we can make them work, but you have to let us put our flavour on it and our sort of approach on it. But I'm really excited by this at the moment, because it is a game changer for us. The way I look at the phases of Manchester and Greater Manchester, my era was when things left. When I came back from university, I tried to stay here. Honestly, hundreds of CVs later, I just couldn't. In my era, 80s and 90s, to get on you had to go south. It was absolutely as simple as that. If you stayed here, you were basically trading away your career options. There was a middle period, mid-90s to the pandemic, that I would say was a period of importing both organisations and the people who work for them here, who didn't live here, but they came to work, which was brilliant. But that largely, with Media City or other things you could say, is what happened. The chapter we're going into now is, having built the city region to where it is, we now open up what we've got here now to the talent that's growing up in our 10 boroughs, and that is definitely a different phase of the city region's development. But also, so it's brilliant for people growing up here, but I also believe it gives us an inward investment competitive advantage, because I do go around the world, as you know, promoting the place. If I can say to tech organisations, because it's often tech organisations, when they say to me, well, what about the talent? And I say, well, hang on a minute, I've got a city with 2 Premier League football clubs, the biggest in the world, music scene that is fun, but incredible jobs already, but a talent development system that you won't find in anywhere else. So why would I not do that? That to me is, maybe others. I know I'm trying to create a template for other, and let others follow, as we've done with transport reform. But this, I think, would give us a competitive advantage for 5 or 10 years, and I fully intend to make the most of it.
Yeah, well, that's would be interesting. Some questions or reflections from the audience on that when we get to that point. The other big area I think you're well known for, and again, blaze the trail, and it'll become literally real this year as it starts to roll out, is obviously the B network, and in particular the buses. So just say a little bit about, because that's quite an important part of the Trailblazer deal as well, just where we are, but also where you want to get to over the next few years as well. So just say a little bit more about that.
Yeah, we'll do 5 months to go. So
all on track.
Not that we're
all on track.
Or I should say 4 months, 4 days to go, because it's a bit like that. We're all very counting down every day to the B network now. Yeah, it is on track actually. It is. You wouldn't believe the amount of stuff that's going on behind the scenes. It's huge. But we've got a fantastic team who are leading the change. So the buses, you might see they're beginning to turn yellow, but that will carry on. The B network starts in Wigan, Bolton, parts of Bury, parts of Salford on the 24th of September. And progressively then, the buses will be regulated across the whole of the city region, culminating on the 5th of January 2025. And that is the day when the full B network, phase 1, is in place. And what that means is we will have a single tap-in, tap-out system, London style, with a cap over bike, bus and tram. And that will be integrated delivery-wise, everything. So the trailblazer clicks in with regard to the 2025 to 2030 side of things, and that is integration of commuter rail services into the phase 1 B network. So not all rail services, not Transpennine services. Don't get me started on that.
It's going to keep you away from that. Just
for
blood pressure purposes, nothing for no other reason.
After my health.
Yeah, go on.
These would be commuter rail services that basically are serving our city region. So even if they originate in Buxton, that's one line people may know, or Southport is another. Those are GM commuter lines, and the idea being that they come into the B network. So if you tapped in Buxton, you're in our system, you're in our Greater Manchester cap, and it will probably be livery. We would hope in time it will be a B network livery. Yeah. So that's what the Trailblazer enables, we believe, because it talks of full integration of commuter rail services with the B network. So that's where we are with that. So by the end of the decade, I think realistically now we can say pretty much we'll be well on the way to being net zero as well. A public transport system that is fundamentally different to the one we started the decade with. And again, I just think that will be another reason to create excitement in the city region, another reason to invest. So that one is coming. If I could just put a little sort of downer on it to a degree, I don't think yet we've heard from either of the main parties a commitment to subsidise that system.
No.
And I think we do need that, because any public transport system anywhere in the world does not operate without subsidy to make it as affordable as possible, to make it a genuine alternative to the car. I don't think yet Whitehall has kind of accepted that it needs to subsidise public transport outside of London, but it does, because we're not going to accept a situation where ours always has to wash its face, whereas it gets subsidies in the capital.
And it's such an important point, I think, because it's often about the emphasis is on the kit, the hard, the bus itself, or the tram, or the train, or the rail, or whatever it might be. But actually, the operation of the system, the ability to make it be frequent and to be reliable, are fundamental things that actually make the network and the system really work.
Definitely. We've seen. To be fair, the government gave us some funding through what's called the BSIP, Bus Services Improvement Plan. So we use that, as you know. We were the first to cut bus fares. We put the cap in, and I get massive feedback about it all the time. It's the simplicity of it is one thing that helps, because people were confused before about how much it would cost to get on a bus, but now they know, and that has built confidence to use buses. And the figures tell us that journeys are up by about 10%. So you lower it's not that complicated, is it? You lower the cost of public transport, people use it. But obviously, if we can keep the bus fares at that level, which we want to, or even lower, but I probably can't promise that yet, but if we at least can keep them at that level, I'm trying to do that, and then connect that system to the tram and the daily cap, we can start, if you can have a daily cap of, let's say, £7-8 in Greater Manchester, that's then an alternative to the car, and the place will change again, because people say, actually I will use that now, because the buses are connecting to the tram rather than competing with the tram. The bikes are okay, they're getting well used actually around the city now, the higher bikes have gone down well. So all of it becomes a doable thing then, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You can use it all, it's all in the daily cap.
And obviously that connects to the skills issues that you're raising, in a sense, because if people are acquiring the skills, they need to be able to get to the jobs wherever those jobs are across the city region.
Absolutely.
Right? You kind of benefit from that. So
sure.
These two, those two things work hand in glove.
Yes, they do, Andrew, and it's a really important point, that, because the model of development that's growing here is clustering of those high quality jobs. So Media City, Oxford Road, the airport has a clustering to a degree. We've got these ambitions north of the city region, Atom Valley. If you're going to do that, which I think we've got to do that, because we're more likely to get the highest end investment if we do create world-class clusters with the universities knitted into those places. then you're going to have to help your residents travel there and make it as easy as possible. So yeah, I mean that's the model of economic development that's building here, and good transport's the key to it. As also it is the key to the future of the towns that we all know have struggled. So I'd just recommend to anybody to go along to Falmouth if you've not been in recent times. Go and have a look. Capital and Centric are doing a major investment in the middle of Falmouth. Why are they backing Falmouth? Because it's got really good connectivity to the city. Look at Stockport, the Mineral Development Corporation there. It's really flying again. Why? Because 20-somethings are saying, well, okay, I could live there. I'm 10 minutes from the city. I've got my job there, good graduate job. So all of a sudden, the towns become in play because the city's getting more expensive, as we know, and that's an issue and needs to be discussed. But all of a sudden, the surrounding towns are starting to be seen for their potential to feed a fast-growing city. So that's why I come in a very upbeat mood today, because I can really see it and feel it coming through now, and it's stuff we've talked about for a long time, but it is actually happening. When you see a town like Falmouth kind of getting a major investment in its town centre, which is a not high-end, it's just high-quality living environment for people, you know that something is happening, and it is very much aimed at those affordable housing for those 20, 30 something.
Well, just say something on that, because there's loads in the Trailblazer deal, but you talked a little bit about landlord regulation, but there's also quite a bit in the Trailblazer deal around affordable housing, right?
Yes.
Getting some of the control over some of the things that Homes England are doing, that you'll be able to instruct them rather than the other way around. I think that's a significant point in terms of then pushing housing to where it's needed, but also the types of housing that are needed as well. So say something about that.
Yeah, so that is real progress. So under the Affordable Homes programme run by Homes England, only 5 of our boroughs were able to access funding for social housing, and as a result of the Trailblazer, it will be all 10. So we'll have much greater control more generally over the Affordable Homes programme. So that's really good news. In terms of let's say existing housing stock, we are now looking at a retrofit pipeline, which is also quite exciting, and that would be, as we understand it, devolved to our single block funding. So we're beginning to get to the point where we're going to have a 10-year pipeline for retrofit. And to me, if retrofit is to do everything it should do, it shouldn't just be to make homes net zero, but it should be to improve those homes as well from a living standards point of view. We would get the ability to sign off landlord licensing at the moment. If a local authority wants to introduce a landlord licensing scheme, selective scheme, it has to be signed off by the Secretary of State. Any council in the country will tell you that everyone's waiting for ages and they never tend to hear anything. I could do that now. I think the power would be given to me to sign off landlord licensing. So I think there's a lot in the Trailblazer that isn't just about new build homes, as important as they are. There is a lot in there about how we might really start to get serious about improving housing standards in the existing housing stock.
Yeah. Last question for me for now, slightly different, but go back to a little bit of what you said about the engagement with the government, and you've seen a real change in the mindset and actually a permeation of the principles and ideas of devolution beyond those that were core to it, but actually going into some of those departments that you've touched on that less convinced about it. I mean, what does that tell us, or what does that tell you about where devolution is in the sort of in central government or in government circles, but also do you see a similar understanding and engagement from the Labour Party if they got into government in a 12 or so months time? Do you think they're in a similar position to where the current government currently is?
I think that first part of your question, I think the Trailblazer was a truly significant political moment in this country, because it does mean that devolution in England is irreversible, is what I take it to mean. It's a deepening of it that means it can't be rooted out again. It's here to stay. And let's just be fair and credit to the government for being able to find that agreement amongst themselves. It was different. There are still unconvinced voices, but they are fewer. Yeah, and
quieter.
I just think, I mean, the way I look at it is this, at a time when we've all lived through, in the last decade, there's been a lot of negativity around, hasn't there? You know, it's not been the easiest place in the world to live at times, you know, and it's still there. But I would, you know, please contradict me in your questions, if you think, but I think this is the most positive place to live in the country at the moment, because there's a sense of forward momentum, and what's created that sense of forward momentum, it's devolution, isn't it? In a sort of slightly difficult time, we've just had the sense of more agency and just the ability to put the buses under public control. That just makes people, it doesn't solve their lives overnight, but it just makes it, oh, at least we can do something. And that's a really important thing that we've not had in England, isn't it? The sense of defeatism and, you know, what can we do, and despair about things. Well, at least here we've had that front foot sense of agency that means you can kind of counteract the sclerosis of politics that we've seen at a national level. And I kind of feel that's felt by civil servants when they come here, you know, it's not. And also, I've made it really a big part of what I do to not be overly tribal or point scoring about it. You know, we are a three-party state, and the three-party state of Greater Manchester agreed our trailblazer asks across, you know, the floor, if you like, and then have won those asks from a government as well. So I think the thing is, this layer that's emerging through combined authorities is the most functional layer of government in England, in my view, and it's got to be really protected as a sort of more pragmatic place-based space rather than a party-first space, and that's what I'm trying to build it. And I hope that has created enough sense down there that, okay, well, this is a place these are mechanisms and places we can work with. So yeah, I hope so anyway. I mean, you know, I feel that that's where it's going. As the Labour Party, well, obviously the Gordon Brown review is a very significant commitment to devolution. I would like to see more detail from them, if I'm honest with you. I would like to see more recognition of what Labour mayors are doing. I think the Conservatives sometimes talk more about their mayors than Labour talks about its mayors. But, you know, but that's just a side point. I would like just to see, you know, a kind of a greater kind of sense from all the parties actually about what is an all England model of devolution, because what we're doing will become at risk if you leave Lancashire out of the picture ongoing, or Cumbria out of the picture, or, you know, East Anglia, or you know, I think it's really important that we start to say, well, so far so good, but this is how you complete the map and make everywhere feel that sense of agency that we feel we've got. Great,
excellent, good. Okay, let's take some questions. We'll take a couple at a time. Just say who you are. One there, one there, one there, and then we'll come back to another. Yes, sir. Just say who you are and fire your question off.
Hi, how's it going? I'm Will Franks from NCC Group. So first of all, thanks, really positive, really share the optimism. Really interested in the stuff you talked about, new powers over housing, and not just improving net zero, but also standards of living. What's going to be the role for housing safety within that, and how can we ensure this is the safest place to live within England?
Okay, do you want? I like that.
Do that.
Shall I take the bunch? Yeah.
Oh, let's do the bunch then. I was going to go backwards and forwards as to the best way to do it. Yes, sir.
It's Brendan Evans, and as you know, I've been doing research into the GMCA review, but I'd like to say how impressed I am by the continuity with the sorts of things you were saying in the months leading up to your initial election in 2017, and what you're doing now. I mean, some of the aspirations you have about skills, about changing the school curriculum, now we've got the Manchester Baccalaureate going forward, and about adult training, seems to be progressing very much under the Trailblazer initiative.
It's the politest way I've ever heard somebody call me a stuck record, but I'll take it.
Well, it's more than that. I think it's just a reflection of where we've got to on the floor of politics, right? Which is, we congratulate a politician for doing what they said they were going to do, which is, I mean, that's not for Andy to respond to when he gets to respond. It's just a sad state of affairs, right?
But a slight addition to it, which isn't necessarily subtracting from it at all, but in that period you link those developments not just as you have today to economic development and the new industries and promoting prosperity, but also to inclusive growth, you know, helping those who are failing in our system, of which there's still many in Greater Manchester.
Yes.
Would you like to tie the skills agenda you have to your inclusive growth aspirations?
Very good.
Thank you.
Where was it? Yes, sir.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. Simon Campbell, Prince's Trust. Something we're very familiar with is young people's mental health, and I guess what concerns us is just things like our youth index, which are indicating some of the lowest scores on record. And even today, being quite personal for me, my middle stepson got his first job after university, and he's neurodiverse, but without the European funded project to give him that additional support, he would have really struggled, and it's only because I know about that stuff that I was able to support him to get there. So just really anything you'd like to add on people.
Okay, I'll come back out for another round. So, housing safety, significance of it?
I think the way you frame your question is really right, to talk about housing in that way, rather than as a commodity to be bought, sold and traded and invested in. And it absolutely has got to be about a good home. When you have a 2-year-old dying in Rochdale because of the mould in his home, you're in a really bad place. You're in a crisis situation, aren't you, that needs a very fundamental change. And I think you are right to position it in that way. You know, basic decency in the standard of homes in social rented and private rented sectors. And the Greater Manchester Good Landlord Charter will have that as its bedrock. And if your home is not decent, what can you do about it? And where's the leverage we can give people to do something about it? So that's what, you know, we've got a load of work going on. And we've got the Greater Manchester Tenants Union working with landlords representatives and others to build the Greater Manchester Good Landlord Charter. Bear in mind, it's following the Good Employment Charter. I'm going to a big awards event for that tonight, which has grown hugely and has now got 600 members. We linked the process of regulating buses to the Greater Manchester Good Employment Charter, because we're getting into this sphere now where we're going to link public procurement more to our charters, and that had an effect on that. So with housing, we're going to follow the same route and say, okay, well, where's the traction in this system? Housing benefit or local housing allowance. So the Trailblazer talks, the government is interested in that, to be fair. How do you link payments made through local housing allowance with regard to a conditionality around standards? So it's all being built that way, but safety absolutely is the bedrock of it. How could the enforcement come in? Well, Greater Manchester Fire and Rescue Service could play a big role there, because, you know, post Grenfell, they've been doing a huge amount of work across the city region. They already do something called safe and well checks in people's homes, which is kind of focused on, but actually they could focus that more on physical,
the built environment,
but also then use the enforcement powers that they have over the built environment. So all of those things, and we did get some funding for enforcement. So bear in mind, for anyone from here who's in any of our 10 districts, as some of you may be, you'll know that the enforcement function's been pretty battered over the last decade. So we have got some funding to start building back up, you know, environmental health and some of the other functions of enforcement. But the chart, you know, to me, you can see where my brain is: B Network, Manchester Baccalaureate, Integrated Skills System, Greater Manchester Good Landlord Charter. These are the three big frontiers that we're now fighting on. But safety is absolutely critical to that. Brendan,
Inclusivity.
Yes.
When you have talked about that a lot, but just emphasise that again.
Yeah, and in some ways, it's, you know, both questions are in similar territory. Because by thinking about, you know, that journey I described for you about the 14-year-old in Greater Manchester, what's the main thing that improves people's health, physical and mental? It's like having a sense of being valued, having a role in life, knowing where you're going. And too many of our young people don't have that, and the pandemic's made it worse. You know, so if we don't fix technical education, I think we are accepting that we're going to have a lot of people in the city region who don't reach their potential, and, you know, often then might have kind of health needs that will have to be met in a different way. And it's not right. It never has been right that this country is obsessed on universities and forgotten everything else. But that's, if we're honest, it happened too much in the government that I was in. It's happened too much in recent times. The whole system is too rigged towards universities. Well, rigged is the wrong word. I don't mean that in a negative way, because universities are great. They're a really important place. But you can't have only that route, can you? So the inclusivity side of it, Brendan, is absolutely baked into that. You know, it's about lifting aspirations across all of our residents, giving every young person in this city region a path in life to where they want to go and have a good job and a good life. And actually, this system that we're building will be lifelong. So how do we help residents who are older, who perhaps are in a sort of part of the economy that doesn't feel like it's the best bit of the economy? How can we use the adult education budget and boot camps to help people pivot out of where they are into the growing parts of the Greater Manchester economy? So it's not a sort of just a younger person's vision. So no, it is all about inclusive growth. That is absolutely where all 10 leaders are. Those debates of maybe 5 or 10 years ago here, where it was a bit about, it was just getting sort of high-end investment, and it doesn't, that. I don't think it ever was a completely fair characterisation, to be honest. But if to the extent that it had some truth in it, I think we really are in a different space now. And the thing that is the change bit about this chapter is starting to talk seriously about lifting the north of Greater Manchester, dealing with our own north-south divide. I think that is something, again, long talked about here, but with precious little kind of action. But now, I sat on the Atten Valley Mayoral Development Zone board last week. There is a structure coming through now to make a very serious intervention in the north of the city region with transport infrastructure to match. So, inclusivity is really becoming evident in all of our priorities to this.
Let's take another bunch of questions. Got one there and one there for certain. Yes, and then one there. So we'll go 1, 2, 3. Yeah.
Hi, Sammy Wally from in Manchester. My question is in relation to phasing and similarly around inclusive growth. So you've spoken heavily in regards to the amazing work you're doing to advertise Manchester to the world and the industry-led post-16 education system that is getting introduced. My question is in regards to how do you ensure that as there's a influx of new businesses into the city that we have the skills in-house to match in the interim, or how is that like? Is there any conversations in regards to phasing? The other question is in regards to bringing communities of different socioeconomic conditions and with different needs into this development and growth. Often we've seen in the past that these communities are left behind, and there's been a lot of work with, I guess, clearing out like Berry Road, which might be a however, sometimes that isn't followed up with ensuring that these communities could integrate into the mechanisms that are put in place to allow them to thrive. I'm just wondering what conversations are being had there to ensure that these communities, which are often left behind, marginalised, are properly introduced into this new mechanism.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much. Yes.
Hi, I wanted to ask or build on the housing question. A couple of years ago, you seemed to be roundly in favour of rent control, and that seems to have dropped out of the conversation. Was that something the government didn't like, or something you decided is not the way forward in creating affordable housing or allowing people to afford housing in the area? And if so, why?
Okay. So you're in favour of affordable housing, or are you in favour of rent control? That's basically what that question is. Right? We know you're going to be in favour of affordable housing, but we want to know whether you're in favour of rent control. Good question. Good question. Yes.
Hi, Rachel Johnson. I'm an Associate Director at Social. We're a purpose-driven communications business here in Manchester, and actually sponsoring Good Employment Charge Awards tonight. So see you again later.
See you later.
First point was just like your commitment to young people. Really excited about that. It's something we're committed to as a business, and would love to have a conversation with you about being a trailblazer business maybe as part of that process.
Yeah.
But my question was about English devolution more broadly. And obviously the trailblazers hopefully will blaze a trail, with obviously West Yorkshire, South Yorkshire currently starting their conversation with the government about their secondary trailblazer deals. But where do you see, what's next for English devolution? Where would you like it to be? And could we aspire to a national economic model where actually it's driven from the bottom up, not the top down?
Okay.
Three
good questions.
Yeah,
very good.
Absolutely. Samuel's too modest to say that he was at one of the very first events I did when I ran for Mayor of Greater Manchester, and with others challenged me to do more for young people, and I think was one of the architects of the R Pass, our free bus pass for 16 to 18. So few people in the room who've been on this more than me, is what I'm saying. You know, we've built this together, haven't we? And it's, you know, it was. Do you remember the event, don't you, at Bury College, where you spoke brilliantly? So that's what I love about it, actually. The thing is with the mayor, it's like, but it's not, is it? I love the fact that it can be much more inclusive as a process. You know, when we are building what we want to do, and that takes me to your question, Samuel. I mean, to me, that's what devolution offers. It's that ability to have all voices in the debate about the use of devolved power. So. What are we doing to make sure that all communities benefit? Well, I think in truth there's more to be done there, but I am acutely conscious that, you know, while we like to pat ourselves on the back in Greater Manchester, perhaps too much sometimes, we don't have a great story to tell with regard to the representation of all communities in, let's say, the sort of more senior decision-making positions across the city region, and we need to do something about that. And we established a race equality panel. We had in the pandemic, a big inequalities commission led by Professor Kate Pickett. Some of the things I've touched on this afternoon, the policies that almost are coming from that, you know, the skills thing I've been talking about, would materially change life in some of our least advantaged communities. And the housing work I've talked about as well. A specific is we set up a programme with Operation Black Vote, a civic leadership and mentoring programme, that we are also keen for private sector colleagues to join as well, to create, to open doors for people really, you know, to sort of, you know, create opportunity, because, you know, we're not as diverse at a more senior level as we should be as a city region. We need to be honest about that, just, you know, be clear about it. One of the great strengths of this city region, and you know, I'm going to keep saying it, there's no room for culture wars here. We want diversity at every level, because actually that is what makes you, in my view, again, an attractive place to invest, where talent of all people, all voices are represented at every level of organisations. Therefore, those organisations are going to be more in touch with all communities. And I think we've got more to do there, if I'm honest with you. I think that's early days and early steps, but I think, you know, that's something we've got to work at harder with more intent, really. So,
would you agree, and because I hear this, you'll hear this lots in different places, it is easier to grapple with and deal with those sorts of issues about inclusivity and making sure people benefit from growth when there is dynamism and there is growth, right? In the sense that, I'm not saying that is, you know, that's the only thing, but it does give you a broader range of options of things you can do if there is wealth being created or if there are jobs being created, because in many other parts of the country, you know, they lack that dynamism as well as not having particularly inclusive communities as well.
Yeah,
because I think that touches a little bit on that question, right? Which is, how then do you manage and how do you engage in the costs of growth, because there are always costs.
Yeah.
And unaffordable housing is an inevitable, or it is a symptom of that, which you then have to grapple with.
Yeah.
It's a symptom of success in some respects.
Yeah, there's a danger as well, though, isn't there? Growth can accentuate inequality, can't it? Because it's overheating one little bit of the city region, and I think people were making that point a few years ago. You know, then the gap between the communities that are left behind. But that's what I'm trying to say, though. I think we're getting towards a sort of a model here of helping everybody find a place within the growing economy of Greater Manchester. We know that there are going to be significant workforce challenges over the coming years. So, you know, the opportunity to help people retrain and access opportunities in a different part of the economy is there, and we've got to create that path for everybody. What I would say is, and this is where if we're honest, I'm not sure a meeting of minds yet with the Department of Work and Pensions. Our experience says, make that as personalised and as supportive as you possibly can. This narrative that comes out of the papers down there, you know, politicians playing to newspapers down in Westminster. I've been down there, I've seen them do it, I know what goes on. Actually, if you make support for people who are furthest from the labour market personalised and truly supportive, rather than designed to trip them up through sanctions and all the rest of it, all of our evidence for what we've done with the work programme is that people will succeed. If you set people up to succeed, they will succeed. What we often have is a sort of national policy sort of context that is almost about punishing and about labelling and the more we could devolve control of the benefit system, the better job I think we would do with that huge amount of money that goes into it. I'm absolutely sure about that. It's interesting to see Princess Trust agreeing with that, but I think we've done work together, haven't we, as well on this area, and I just think that's the way to go. Housing First is another big example of that. That's the homelessness pilot that we've run. What it does is it lifts people out of the tyranny of benefits rules and housing allocation policy, and just says, okay, you've got a home for as long as you need it, so you take the time to recover. And they do, and it's just like sometimes the national systems designed in Westminster are kind of to please certain newspapers, kind of create this sort of scroungers type stuff. It really doesn't work at all of that nonsense. Because on the rent control, well, I actually signed a letter with the tenants union, I think it was about 2 months ago, calling for them. So I think, question mark permanent rent controls, but I think there is personally a case for much stronger regulation of the PRS. Certainly in a cost of living crisis, for sure, there should be a control mechanism in place, and I think there's an argument that there should be a regulated sector, because otherwise, we're just seeing rent rise and rise and rise, aren't we? And people priced out, and with the eviction situation being so simple for landlords, it's not a good thing, is it? So no, I have supported them in the past. And let me just say on that though, this isn't, any landlords in the room, this is not actually an initiative that's about demonising landlords, because it's called a good landlord charter. What we're trying to do is celebrate people who act in a good way and ethically and do maintain their homes to a safe standard and do treat the tenants properly. So that's the way we're trying to do it, in a way that is about celebrating good practice, if you like. But no, I think whichever way you look at it, a good landlord charter will need a regulatory environment at the national level, and there is a renters reform bill, isn't there, coming soon to Parliament. So, soon. We've been told that for a while. And where are we going?
Yeah, so we need to finish it. So Richard's question is, what's your vision?
You can stay a bit longer if you want.
What's your vision for Devo? But also, having gone through the Trailblazer deal very recently, and others are beginning to think about maybe getting into that position, what would be your lesson? What would be your bit of advice to them, as they get into it, whether it's Tracy or whether it's Steve or whoever it might be?
Yeah. My advice, we've just been talking about it actually on an M10 call before this. And
very good.
One good thing I can say to all of you is we do work in a very collaborative way. I mean, you think when the mayors came in, everyone would be like, elbowing each other out of the way. There's always an element of that, but your revision or something. We didn't actually want to. I keep saying to Steve, he's fine being the home of cheese.
He didn't really win, is that what you're saying?
We'll be cool.
He didn't really win, we let you win.
We let you win.
It's more like that.
Yeah, exactly. So actually we're collaborative largely, and not all of the 10, but the vast majority of the 10. And the way we approached it, and West Midlands with Andy Street as well, was that we were open book with each other and with the other 8 to say, well, this is what we're asking for, we hope you get it too. So, and now the other 8 are looking at that now, so well, you pick that up. So that's, I think that's a really good way in which this is being built actually, the pragmatic, sort of place first, not party first. It's really important to keep that spirit going as long as we can. Where does it get to? Well, I'm going to have to answer this more in terms of, it sounds a bit grand this, but my kind of vision for the country as a whole, because I don't think you can look at it in isolation from just a wider sort of governance of the UK. I do argue for what I call the rewiring of Britain, basically, and that is political reform in Westminster combined with devolution to the English sub-regions. But I would also say, I see that obviously Scotland is changing or potentially changing, who knows, but for all their critique of Westminster, they did exactly what Westminster has done in my view and hoovered up power to the Holyrood level. And where I go around the world, what I see is city regions are leading change. I mean, your organisation, Andrew, has made this argument rightly for a number of years. These are the places where kind of digitalisation will happen more quickly, where decarbonisation will happen more quickly, where innovation will take place. It's that coming together of industry, academia, isn't it, and people in public life. That's where the energy is, isn't it? And I think it is positive energy in this city, and long may it be so. I think everywhere needs to sort of start to develop more across the UK, more bottom-up devolution. It would be a really great thing when myself or Steve Rotherham starts picking up the phone to the elected mayor of the Greater Glasgow, and that would be a great thing, because I think it would take us all to a better political space, or the elected mayor of Cardiff, or of Greater Dublin, because they're about to bring in an elected mayor over there. So I just think that would be just so different and better, to not always have everything through the prism of frosty, awkward politics at the national level and all the tensions that come with that. Just to get, so I do think part of my rewiring is, maximum devolution out, and that is moving towards a degree of fiscal devolution, around, obviously we've got the single settlement, but it should come with land value capture, for instance, would be something that we should have. There's a range of other fiscal measures that you could consider us having, but it's got to be within a kind of reformed parliament as well at the other end of it, because you need a national parliament, but one that serves all places and all people equally. It is an elected Senate of the nations and regions to replace the unelected lords. It is, in my view, proportional representation for the Commons, because I don't believe you could argue that first past the post has combined anything other than a quite highly unequal country. But also I go further, having been in Westminster for 16 years, I took a removal of the whip system so people can work across party lines more, and form alliances for places as opposed to parties. And actually that would hand power to Parliament and away from the civil service, which is not a disrespect to civil servants, it's just simply that is where the power should be, rather than kind of government party just rubber stamping what the government departments are asking for, which is what happens at the moment. So I'm talking really, I think it's completely where most people are, in my view, actually, who I speak to. People want a rewiring of the country. Let's make it less sort of adversarial, more practical in terms of the way that it works, more bottom up. Bottom up change is better change, because you can sit in a room like this and debate it and then use it together, can't you? That's a better way always to make change. So I think you can start to feel of a UK that looks more like Germany in time, where you have just a much more even balance between national, state level power and regional power. I do want what the Germans have in their constitution, which is a basic law that requires equivalent living standards across the 16 Länder of Germany. Imagine if this country had had a requirement for equivalent living standards, across all the regions of England. We'd live in a very different place today if we'd had that post-war than the one we've actually have got. And a Barnett formula added into that. So you get my full shopping list here. But why not? Because I think we can't carry on the way that we were, can we? Because I think where we've got to, and what the Brexit thing blew open, was then all of the frustrations that everyone's got about living in a country where it's visibly inequitable, and we've got to recast it as something better. And I think it's obvious what that something better is. So, that's where I see it. So
brilliant. Well, I think that's a big picture and an optimistic point to finish. And it's always a pleasure to have you. I know you're very busy, but it's always a pleasure to talk. It says wide ranging as well as getting into the details. So thank you very much for spending the time with us, please. Thank you very much.